Ruchir, another very interesting thought that comes to mind is about the theory of Marxism, because with regards to in context of India, it gains a lot of negative traction from those in the Indic worldview, or those who espouse the Indic worldview. So, although we do see in the West that it has a connotation of an anti-colonial ideology, so, how is Marxism fitting into this anti-colonial versus colonial line of thought in the Indian context? What relevance does it have here?
So in the Indian context, Marxism is dead. And it was killed by the CPI and CPM, by the ones who loved it the most. And the reason for that is that although they called themselves communists, although they called themselves Marxists, they were not true believers in either the theory or the praxis of Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the end of the day, what is Marxism? And to differentiate, there's a difference between Marxism, Marxism-Leninism, and Maoism. So
Okay.
Marxism alone is simply a tool of historical analysis, of social analysis, of economic analysis, which at its fundamentals says that the foundations of society, so that could be the state, religion, social
Mm-hmm.
relations, are all built on an economic basis. That it's only with a certain economic structure that these social constructions come into being. And they say that, oh, society goes from primitive socialist societies at village level to slave societies, to slave mode of production, to the feudal mode of production, to the
Mm-hmm.
capitalist mode of production, to the communist mode of production, and then history ends. So that's a linear, understanding of history. But all Western understandings of history are linear. Within that, let's say we take this Marxist theory to be applicable to India and to be correct. Is India ready, for that final stage of communism or socialism? No, India still has a feudal, mode of production, or a
Mm-hmm.
semi-capitalist, semi-feudal one. So in that case, a purist Marxist would say you need to accelerate the transition from feudalism in India to capitalism. And once there's capital accumulation, then people will demand a more socialist state one way or
Mm-hmm.
another, because they say capitalism collapses because of its own contradictions, that capitalism will create inequalities that will make people demand change. Now, what we have in India are not Marxists, even though they call themselves that. They're Marxist Leninists. So
Okay.
Lenin in the Soviet Union, or in when he was in exile in Switzerland, and then went back to Russia to create the Soviet Union, he said that it's not enough to just wait for these historical processes to lead to their inevitable consequences. He said that you need what's called a vanguard party. So a
Mm-hmm.
vanguard party is headed by the intelligentsia, or by a few enlightened people, and it's their job to remove the false consciousness of the proletariat, that the working class, because they're poor, they don't realize the structural reasons for them being poor. So they need to be guided by a party that will then establish a dictatorship of the proletariat on their behalf. Now,
Okay.
the Indian left, the Indian Marxists, Indian communists, arose from that. They're not organic thinkers, rooted in Indian society and ideology. The
Mm-hmm.
CPI was not even founded in India. It was founded in Tashkent by M.N. Roy, who was the golden boy of what was called Comintern, the Communist International, which was a branch of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union
Mm-hmm.
that was tasked with creating affiliate communist parties around the world. And Moscow believed that India was not ready for communism yet. So the CPI, when it was founded, so it was founded by M.N. Roy, who had earlier founded the Communist Party of Mexico, I believe, and it was founded in
Mm-hmm.
Tashkent. So it was the second party he created. And then the party was created artificially without any grassroots support.
Mhm.
and without any grassroots intellectualism. There was no indigenization of the theory or the
Mhm.
praxis. So
Mhm.
what did they do? They sent Indian Marxists for mentorship and coaching under the Communist Party of Great Britain, because the Communist Party of Great Britain had a half Indian, half Swedish professor, Rajni
Mhm.
Palmedat, who's still part of the syllabus in India because he's the big daddy of all the CPI members who Nurul Hassan put
Mhm.
into our universities and NCRT in the 70s.
Mhm.
Uh, so Rajni Palmedat was the only expert Comintern had about Indian history and society, and he mentored all
Mhm.
of these early leaders of the CPI.
Mhm.
Now, during the Second World War, Britain and the Soviet Union were both allies, and they were fighting the Third Reich, so Nazi Germany. So naturally, despite the other parties taking part in quit India movement or demanding independence, the CPI, because it was being mentored by the Communist Party of Great Britain, did not engage in any anti-colonial activities during the 40s because they were instructed both by Moscow and London not to shake the boat when the two countries were committed to an alliance and were fighting the Germans. So as a
Mhm.
result, they played no role in the Indian independence movement. But upon independence, then the CPI launched a people's war against independent India. So in 1947 to 48, or 48 onwards, they launched the slogan with approval from Moscow because Stalin didn't like Nehru. He thought Nehru tried to flatter him too much and was not actually committed to socialism. He just wanted the aesthetics of socialism without
Mhm.
any of the practical benefits. So, Stalin, in his infinite wisdom, saw through the facade of Nehru, who wanted like a posh English version of socialism. So the CPI, on instructions from Moscow, declared people's war in Telangana against independent India and fought a civil war and were defeated by the Indian army. And after that, they would pass resolutions. So there was the slogan "Ye Azadi Jhuti hai." So they would say, "Oh, this is false independence. The Constitution is a charter of slavery. Nehru, he's just creating a police state, a fascist police
Mhm.
state run by brown Englishmen," which is funny, but all of that is true. And now, there's a very different party that believes all of these things. Uh, and then what was funny is that as Nehru grew closer to the Soviet Union in foreign policy, Moscow instructed them to dilute this. So the criticism of the Congress and Nehru started getting diluted with every party Congress. So soon they were saying, "Oh, India is a semi-colonial state, but
Mhm.
Nehru is not such a bad guy." Within a few party congresses, they started saying maybe we need a progressive front, an alliance, of the left and the Congress to keep, the fascist forces and communal forces out. So basically, the CPI was, remote controlled. It was created abroad, mentored abroad, got its instructions abroad, and was not organic, did not have grassroots support or any localization of the theory. They did what London and Moscow told them, respectively, during different eras.
Mhm.
Then, in the end, they did end up making this progressive front with the Congress. The CPI did, at least. This was after the split. So the CPI split up into the CPI, Communist Party of India, and the
Mhm.
CPIM, the Communist Party of India, Marxist.
Mhm.
And now, again, this is a misappropriation. They call themselves Marxists, but they're not Marxists. They're not Marxist Leninists. They were Maoists. They split from the party because they thought the CPI was too conservative and too pro Moscow, and Beijing was the real communism. Everyone else was
Mhm.
revisionist. So, revisionist is a very insulting term among Marxists, among the left, among communists. So, basically, anything you don't like is revisionist. So, China used to call. The Soviet Union revisionist and said, "Oh, we're building pure communism here." The Soviet Union said, "Oh, China revisionist. They're diluting the genius of Marx and Lenin with their
Mhm.
Maoist theory." Albania, big brain, Anwar Hoxha there, he said everyone is revisionist except me. Albania is the only pure state, and they went on believing this till 1989. So after the split, so the CPI split between the pro-Moscow faction and the pro-Beijing faction. The pro-Moscow faction teamed up with the Congress I. So the Congress had also split. Indira Gandhi had taken a chunk of the seats. Morarji Desai was left with the rest. And
Mm-hmm.
after Lal Bahadur Shastri passed away mysteriously in Tashkent again, in that special city, uh, the the uh, the party had put Indira Gandhi, in charge as the new prime minister. And in order to consolidate her position after splitting the party,
Mm-hmm.
she engaged in an understanding with the CPI that the CPI would support her in case of a no confidence motion, as long as they got to plant their assets in important places, in the media, in academia, in the judiciary. And that was part of that whole committed
Mm-hmm.
bureaucracy, committed media, committed judiciary.
Mm-hmm.
And Nurul
Certainly.
Hassan, Sayyid Nurul Hassan was the CPI ideologue who was made Minister of Education, and he had many disciples: Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, Dien Jha, all these
Mm-hmm.
so-called eminent historians, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
they all started off. They learned at the feet of Rajni Palmedat, and then they were given a very privileged position through these machinations. But
Mm-hmm.
even if you look at articles and analyses written during those times, so for example, Hiranmay Karlekar, he's a prolific author and former editor of the Pioneer and the Hindustan Times. He was a Nieman Fellow in Harvard in 1967,
Mm-hmm.
so journalism fellow. He wrote an article for the Harvard Crimson, so the Harvard student newspaper, analyzing the 1967 Lok Sabha elections,
Mm-hmm.
in which he says that there's a CPI, there's a CPM, but very few voters are going to vote for them because they know that these parties have an extraterritorial loyalty, that they're more loyal to Moscow and Beijing than they are to India, because they don't have a vision. They're not fighting elections to create a socialist India. They're foreign agents who are there to either make India more pro Soviet Union or pro China, or to facilitate the conditions for an eventual revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And for that they got their funding from abroad, their intellectual support from abroad, and it actually didn't translate into any support of the grassroots until there was some sort of indigenization. So
Okay.
yeah, so Marxism in India, it never existed in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
We just got this discount, foreign import. So we don't have an Indian Marxism, and the people who call themselves Indian Marxists are, to use everyone's favorite term, revisionists, who are discredited and not taken seriously by Marxists in the rest of the world. Uh, that apart, we do have Indian socialists like Acharya Narendra Dev or Jayaprakash Narayan, who studied Marxism and used it as an array of many other tools to understand Indian society and develop their own Sarvodaya or Antyodaya philosophies. So that's what's important, rather than being, these left like to fight the Indian left, or where the purists. So, for example, in the late 80s, early 90s, when Gorbachev was reforming the Soviet Union with Glasnost and Perestroika, Deng Xiaoping in China was reforming China to make it more market friendly. He said,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter if it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it catches mice, it's a good cat. So that
Mm-hmm.
the goal is more important than the means. Shekhar Gupta, the editor of the print, as a younger journalist, he asked a senior CPI leader that, look, the Soviet Union is changing, China is changing. When will you look at these reforms for the Indian left front?
Mm-hmm.
And he said very proudly, the communism of the CPI is purer than that of Deng and Gorbachev. and that was basically the end of the line for them.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.